If you have your cell phone, the cell phone can emit a weak magnetic field. Okay, weak magnetic fields have effects. You open up an app and it's like your healing app, and you click the heal button. It makes it so that your phone starts emitting a magnetic field of the right frequency and strength, and it makes your cells heal more quickly.
We embody the idea that citizens are scientists and that scientists just ask questions. They want to get to ground truth, and the DAO is a vehicle where they can meet like-minded people, share these ideas, find consensus, and ultimately point resources to answering those questions that you're not the only one that has, but that individually you against the system would be, laughed out of the room, which we think is ridiculous.
It looks really plausibly like it's one of them, and if that's the case, then we're then going to decode way more about how biology works.
Incredible stuff. This has been blowing my mind for weeks now. Well, thank you guys so much for joining, and thanks to everyone who is on the line joining. My name is Nate Hinman from BioProtocol. We are excited to be kicking off this series of live streams highlighting new biotech DAOs accepted early into cohort 2 of the Bio Incubator. For anyone new joining us, Bio is a protocol for decentralized science acceleration. So we take dispersed communities of scientists, researchers, and patients, and we turn them into biotech DAOs that collectively own and govern the cures that they develop. So once BioDAOs make it through the incubator, they fundraise through a token sale and become eligible for funding from the community, for milestone-based incentives, and for on-chain liquidity. And so today we are excited to unveil the first new biotech DAO to be accepted into cohort 2, and that is Quantum Biology DAO. Welcome to the founders first of Quantum Biology DAO, Clarice and Geoff. Thank you guys so much for joining us. On the line, we also have James, our head of the incubator on the bio team, and Benji from the molecule team as well. So let's just kick things off. Clarice, I'll have you take over. Feel free to introduce yourself and also introduce the project.
Awesome. So it's a super pleasure to be talking to you and to have been accepted in this new cohort. Geoff and I are very excited about the BioXYZ partnership because quantum biology is coming. So quantum biology is the study of the extent to which biology might be running on the weird laws of quantum physics. And some people might ask, so isn't quantum physics what happens in the domain of the very small and under very organized circumstances only? In fact, there is a growing body of evidence that biology, in fact, does run on quantum. So I like to call myself a quantum engineer. This means that I build instruments to study and control things that are so small and so well protected from their environment that they're better described by the laws of quantum physics, as opposed to the laws of classical physics that rule everything big around us. In particular, I am trained in a field known as quantum sensing. This means that you can mathematically prove that if you use a quantum object, such as an electron, as a sensor, your measurement is improved. In other words, the sensor quantumness enhances the measurement. There is abundant chemical data for the chemistry of test tubes that shows that electrons in solutions are quantum sensors, for example, of magnetic fields. And there is a lot of correlative evidence that organisms respond to magnetic fields in a way that is consistent with inside their cells there being a quantum sensing process that is electrons basically sensing magnetic fields. So I would like to spend just 3 slides on this idea. There is tons of evidence spanning more than half a decade that shows that weak magnetic fields on the order of the magnetic field of the Earth, on the magnetic field produced by your cell phone, there's evidence that weak magnetic fields can both up and down regulate all of the cellular process that you see there, from cell proliferation rates to how much DNA gets repaired, to the configuration of your cellular skeleton, to how much energy is made. And the cool thing is that those processes respond to magnetic fields in a way that is consistent with quantumness, living for long enough inside their cells for it to matter macroscopically. Okay, and hopefully you see my slide change. Yes. Up to now, the way that people have been interacting or studying this phenomenon is completely haphazardly. So it's a true statement. People have been finding magnetic fields, weak magnetic fields that do stuff for your cells for like decades, right? And there are companies that stumbled across magnetic fields that do this, reduce tumors, increase the proliferation rate of lab-grown meat. And really what they do is come across magnetic fields. There is no rationale to design those magnetic fields. It's a big phase space of different magnetic field strengths, frequency, direction. And I liken it to being in a haystack, grabbing a little bit of hay and finding a needle. So can we do better? And I think we can. I think we can break clean with this old way of trying to study those phenomena, which are putatively quantum in origin, by developing new instruments. New instrumentation drives science forward. And I propose to build a glorified type of microscope, which is in fact a quantum microscope composed of 4 ingredients, which you can see in my slide. It's a microscope coupled to coils to provide a magnetic field, synchronized everything down to the nanosecond, because that's the time scales of the relevant physics that we care about, and that can do single photon collection, because for reasons, just in case there is a quantum expert, this is how we do quantum state readout. You put those 4 ingredients together and we get to what I'm tentatively calling the code book on how to tweak those weak magnetic field effects in biology for function, because this is not a basic science curiosity. We're very excited to partner with the DeSci community because we think that you are more finely attuned to the future, because what we want is to be able to provide, if you will, electromagnetic interventions that do not require genetic engineering. All the degrees of freedom are already there. They're not chemical, it's all electromagnetic. It doesn't require surgery. Magnetic fields penetrate throughout the body. It doesn't have like the same problem that lasers have. It's cheap, it's remotely actuated, and maybe even accessible to anyone with a cell phone, because your cell phone with the hardware that's already there can already provide the weak magnetic fields that would be needed. What we're missing then is like this code book on how to choose those knobs to do different things rationally to alter physiological function. And again, we think that this might have applications from therapeutics, theranostics, longevity, going up to food security. If you can produce more food, more insulin producing bacteria by just applying weak magnetic fields, to think as long-term as space colonization. Because if you want to colonize Mars, for example, you'd better know how the biology of humans and of the food sources react to the different magnetic field on Mars with respect to the Earth. And this is corroborated with our just out study that shows with open data, large data, super well controlled, mega study showing that if you remove the Earth's very tiny magnetic fields, biology reacts to it. In particular, we track that the embryogenic development of tadpoles, of frog embryos, changes, is accelerated in the lack of Earth's magnetic field. So this is we want that, we hope that this study that is just out will shift the scientific consensus that those weak magnetic field effects in biology are indeed real, are indeed measurable, and we want now to be able to having to have the scientific community and the informed public aware that those weak magnetic field effects are there and they can be harnessed for purpose. And that's our next scientific goal. And with that, I will stop sharing, and maybe it's time for Geoff to introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Geoff. I learned about quantum biology from Clarice a little bit more than a year ago. And after spending time, it's like the first question is the science actually solid? And Clarice mentioned the 50 years of data on weak magnetic fields, but essentially the tadpole replication that was just done is the best study on that topic. And so it looks like we just have very good evidence now that weak magnetic fields are in fact having some effect in biology. This helps to corroborate the larger body of evidence. And then there's a question of, well, are weak magnetic fields actually working through a quantum mechanism? And there are only a very small number of known explanations. Maybe there's small chunks of magnetite, which does happen occasionally in biology, but not usually. Sharks and rays are able to respond to weak magnetic fields because they have special conduction channels. But when we look at different cells and look at different organisms, we don't find those things. And then there's the very, very outside chance that we're dealing with actually new physics. But if it's not new physics and it's not magnetite and it's not conduction channels, well, the only explanation left is this quantum one. And Clarice had this very sort of interesting opportunity. And she was originally working as a quantum chemist, looking at how currently you have microscopes that are used to basically use a quantum sensing mechanism that are used for non-biological things. But then she realized, okay, it looks like this is actually the same thing happening in cells, that actually proteins are acting as quantum sensors. And then this is something that essentially nobody was looking into. So learned about that, concluded that the science was solid, and then realized that there's a huge opportunity here. And interestingly, it's an opportunity that people are going to eventually realize en masse, but there's a possibility of getting way ahead of the curve and realizing this before anybody else does. Essentially, the steps of reasoning are, as I see it, I think this is how Clarice sees it as well. There's first, are weak magnetic field effects actually real in biology? That's question number one. We just did the study. The answer, we already thought the answer would be yes from all of the previous studies, but this is high-end, very well controlled, etc. So we got a check mark there. So then the next question is, what is if we grant that there are, like by applying weak magnetic fields to different cells, different biocompounds, you get effects, well then what's causing that? So then the next step is, well, it's not new physics, it's not small chunks of magnetite we haven't picked up with microscopes, it's not conduction channels that we haven't seen, and so the only remaining explanation is it's quantum. Okay, cool, you say, so there's a quantum mechanism, but quantum physics affects everything, and why does it matter that it's, photosynthesis works on a quantum mechanism? Why does this matter? Well, the next step is that if biology has taken advantage, or rather, the quantum mechanism that's postulated here differs from the photosynthesis one in that this requires quantum states to last notably longer than people are thinking. This is not lasting seconds, this is still on the nanosecond time scale, but it's still way longer than people think. And if quantum states are lasting longer than people think, then that gives nature an opportunity to take advantage of quantum states in way more, in a much larger number of places. And so the inference goes from biology, from weak magnetic field effects to longer lasting quantum mechanism to this is something that evolution would have taken advantage of absolutely everywhere it could, which means you should actually expect there to be you should expect pervasive quantum biological effects. As soon as you get to, and then that maps onto and matches the experimental evidence from weak magnetic field effects in biology. And so if biology is in this much more fundamental sense running on quantum, then if we understand it, this is Clarice's idea of the code book, if we understand it, then we can learn how to control it. If we can learn how to control it, then this would be using weak magnetic fields. Right now, we don't know what's the magnitude and frequency. Do we use pulses? What's the pattern, right? You have some companies have gotten success applying weak magnetic fields as reduction of tumors, helping to treat pain from diabetes as two examples, but no one has a mechanistic and thorough understanding of how exactly the dynamics work. So then, if biology is running on quantum and almost no one has been looking into this, why not? Well, you need to build a quantum microscope, that's expensive. But as soon as you actually get the ability to look into it, you start to decode how biology is using weak magnetic fields. And then once you have that, then you can alter it, which means that you could then conceivably do all sorts of things. So it's like we gain the ability to modulate many different aspects of cells' behavior, and then lots of health applications and longevity. Clarice mentioned biomanufacturing. Weak magnetic fields can affect cell division rates, so you can make cells divide more quickly. There are a bunch of different possible mechanisms. Sort of the thing that really, the first question I had was, is the science solid? And then the second question I had was, well, how big is the potential impact? As far as potential impact, right now, biology is still surprisingly this big black box. Like we know there's mechanistic explanations for things like circulation of the blood, there's chemical explanations for things like ATP and so forth. You've got DNA, and people have always hoped that we're going to just unlock everything by understanding DNA. We're still, it's been helpful, but we're still waiting. It really looks like there are going to be some number of undiscovered mechanisms that are pervasively at work in biology, and the electromagnetic to quantum loop, feedback loop, it looks really plausibly like it's one of them. And if that's the case, then we are then going to decode way more about how biology works. So that's how I got in. And then, of course, familiar with crypto, and we love things to be able to be done in a centralized way through legacy institutions, but unfortunately the institutions are just frequently so much less functional than people think, than we would like, and that means that in many cases we just have to strike out on our own. And this is what decentralized science is about. Science is in the hands of the people. It's essentially the internet decides to do science, and I think that that's just an amazing combination.
Thank you guys so much, first off, for all that information. Incredible stuff. This has been blowing my mind for weeks now. So I guess, why is that? Why has this space been overlooked by pharma? And what do you think the opportunity really is for DeSci to come in and, like you said, take the science into the community's hands?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer. So essentially, so we have been in conversations with different companies in pharma. We have an advisor from Merck, for example, who's on our advisory team, and they're becoming interested. The big barrier essentially was that there's a bunch of old, you could think of it as a sort of scientific dogma. I think of it maybe more as a simplifying solution. Nobody wanted to deal with quantum mechanics. Okay, it's complicated. It involves a bunch of math. When people explain it, they tell you that things both are and are not the case at the same time. You know, like what's happening there. We are also told that it's too complicated for anyone to understand, and this has led to a simplifying assumption, which is that the quantum effects that occur, they're real, we know that, but they're only occurring at the very, very small, very, very short time scales, and it needs to be isolated. Like, sure, you could entangle two photons and send them to opposite sides of the universe and then collapse the thing, and then, there's entanglement and so forth. But that's like in this highly controlled, super esoteric condition. Whereas as soon as you get to the body, as soon as you get to a cell, you're at room temperature, there's all this stuff moving around. The people have just wanted to believe that quantum factors out. It's like easier, and everyone else is sort of hoping that quantum factors out. And my perspective is that it would be a really sort of surprising fact if you had the basic level of reality, or any basic level of reality ends up being walled off so completely from the sort of next layer up in abstraction, or the higher layers of abstraction. Of course, like, people then admit, okay, yes, well, we see that there's electron tunneling with photosynthesis and so forth, and they're like, okay, there are exceptions, but people really haven't wanted to think about this possibility that actually quantum is pervading biology in a bunch of ways. And then the other part is that it's expensive to investigate. And this is the next step for the Quantum Biology Institute, which Clarice is running, is to build the quantum microscope that she talked about. This is not a cheap thing to do. And so if you have an area that's being neglected by legacy institutions, and it costs a little bit more than, your run-of-the-mill biology experiment, like you actually have to build a legitimate quantum machine, and it's complicated, then pharma is just going to wait, and they're going to outsource risk until somebody manages to prove it. We're hoping to prove it, and then everybody who's coming along with us is going to be there on the ground floor.
If I can just add a quick comment there, I think you nailed it, which is you really do have this burden of proof for a lot of skeptical people. Scientists by nature are extremely skeptical. Mm-hmm. They believe or they give credence to things that have evidence. And right now, a lot of quantum biology, though you guys have demonstrated a lot and provided some substantial evidence, unless you really have your microscope in hand, where you're taking measurements and showing that these effects are real, people are going to write you off as, kind of voodoo science, right? And so I think that's a big piece of it. And so until you have this instrument, you can show that you can, A, measure, and then later B, control, and then C, what people will care about is not even just measure and control, but also effectuate, products that are therapeutic or diagnostics, things that create value in the traditional world. Then they'll start to believe you. I'm sure that, when Einstein was studying like nuclear energy, people are like, this is super interesting. And then when the bomb went kaboom, they were like, okay, he's right. You need kind of your Hiroshima moment, for lack of a better term.
Well, and this is exactly how we've been thinking about it, where so science runs on observational evidence. So if you have a long chain of reasoning, and all your reasoning is very carefully done, but it gets to a counterintuitive conclusion, people aren't going to accept it until you get observational evidence. And then, there's first early adopters and second adopters and so forth. What's going to happen is, as we make steps along the way, more and more people are going to end up buying in. And basically the question is, like, this provides an opportunity for people who are able to follow the reasoning in advance. You'll have the people who, follow the whole reasoning. Then you'll have the people who say, okay, but all of that depends on the weak magnetic field effects in biology being real. We do the tadpole experiment. We show that. They're like, okay, now I don't have to make 6 inferences. I just need to make 5, and you get some people in. Some people, we're going to have to build the quantum microscope. We will. We'll make the observations. As soon as you get the actual live detection of a quantum signature inside a cell, then a bunch of people are going to jump on. The next group are going to say, well, yeah, okay, but is it involved in function? Then we'll show that it's involved in function. And then some people will jump on board, and then the next group will say, okay, but has it been, able to be shown to do anything useful? And then has it been commercialized? And this just sets up a normal adoption pipeline where everyone can, obviously, I think the reasoning works. I'm in early. I feel great about that. But everyone can essentially think about how much do they trust each of the links, and then they can use that to sort of modulate their own, sort of everybody has their own risk tolerance. And we just think that a bunch of people are going to join in as we go.
So one of the things that I think is beautiful about your approach here is that folks can jump in at whatever threshold of skepticism they have, they'll have a home. So if you're infinitely skeptical, you can wait until the very end. And that's no problem. We'll accept you with open arms at the very end. But if you're, early truth seeking and you're willing to go down the rabbit hole to sit down and understand where are these first principles coming from and how are we proposing that they get used, and then running experiments like Clarice, your tadpole experiment, to show, on an N of 3,000 tadpole embryo, that definitively a magnetic field effect alters their development. To me, that's enough of a smoking gun to say, clearly there's something here. Clearly, we need to study this all the way to its end. And I think the beauty of this new scientific field that you all are developing together is that there's a home for folks across the skepticism spectrum that they can join in whenever they feel ready to. But, we all have the conviction today to say, all right, we know where we're going. And so you can follow along whenever you feel like you're ready, but we'll keep you primed and up to date with information. But for those who are interested in getting into the cutting edge, you can today, which is so exciting as a scientist who's always been looking at things on the cutting edge.
And if I may, maybe we should talk a little bit about the DAO too, because I think that we're building the DAO as a way to strengthen the community, right? If the people are enthusiasts, the people are researchers on quantum bio, if people are interested in investing, I think that the DAO is where people will meet to bring about the quantum biology industry by design. Right. Not only we can accommodate people at wherever they feel comfortable joining, but people from coming from different interests, right? And I think that this is a super opportunity that we have to help shape the field, because this is an emerging field. Let's all work together to make the field in a way that we want. For example, one of our core principles has been to show everything that we do. All our data for the tadpole experiment, everything is completely publicly available. So that I think that, and I think that the DeSci community appreciates that, right? So this is one thing that we would like to imprint on the field from its inception.
Yeah, if I could jump in there, I think one of the biggest DAO mechanisms that's helpful, particularly here, is the fact that we are at such an early point in the scientific development that opinions and skepticism are actively helpful to sharpen our hypotheses, to comb through the data, to give us a debate that ultimately can guide the right direction for us to allocate the next experiments or resources to figure out what do people find to be relevant. When starting a new field, there's just so many different directions to run in. And obviously, we have our own hypotheses, but ultimately we get better with the more engagement and the more feedback and the more criticism and skepticism. gets directed towards the idea, towards the data. So uniquely in a DAO, not only do you have an opportunity because of the open ethos of research that happens in DeSci, but you get to become an owner and a director in the network, in the ecosystem, by doing the thing scientists love to do, which is be skeptical, which is ask questions, which is poke around and suggest new things that should be tested, or new reasons why this may or may not work. And so if that's who you are, if you're the kind of person who likes being skeptical about things, who likes poking holes through new ideas, we want you. This is the perfect place for you to be, and you'll get to participate in building that network and owning the network and guiding the network as a result.
So I'm seeing a couple questions come in, and anyone feel free to ask questions on Twitter, or we can bring you right up to ask live. But one of the questions that came in was asking sort of about the roadmap for the DAO. And I guess also for me, it'd be helpful to understand how you guys are setting up this whole ecosystem. So if either Clarice or Geoff, if you guys could sort of break down how the ecosystem as a whole is set up and sort of the roadmap that you envision for the DAO.
Sure, I'll describe the setup, and so Clarice has put into the chat the roadmap. People can also find it at quantumbio.eco. We have essentially in talking to all the different people who were interested in quantum biology, we found we were initially surprised. We found VCs who were interested. They're like, commercialize when. Obviously decentralized science people were interested. We had interest from foundations and also interest from different government agencies. And we found that everyone was essentially looking at everyone else all up and down the pipeline to determine whether the thing was actually going to happen. We didn't want to turn anyone away. We wanted to set up something that would enable each of the different interests to participate in the relevant way. So we designed an ecosystem that is composed of 3 organizations. There's the Quantum Biology Institute, the Quantum Biology DAO, and the Quantum Biology Incubator. The Institute is just a regular nonprofit. It's going to do the fundamental research that is going to confirm or deny, if it ends up denying, but test all of the central hypotheses. And it's, like Clarice described, open by design. All of the IP here is going to be focused on, it's the central thing you need for there to be an industry in the first place. You don't want that to be closed, you want that to be open. That's done on a nonprofit basis, engages government partners, foundations, and philanthropists. So that's the Institute, and the tadpole experiment that we just did was done by the Institute. The first microscope will also be built by the Institute. That's the next step there. So the second organization is the Quantum Biology DAO. Here, the goal was to create something that would allow a community to come together and would allow for additional research and effort that would support the work of the Institute with an eye to being present and essentially ready for the different commercial opportunities as they come through. So it's the Quantum Biology DAO, and then we have the Quantum Biology Incubator. The incubator is going to be the question as to how much is it an incubator versus a venture studio. We're going to be somewhere on that spectrum. But essentially, we have already identified different commercialization opportunities that we expect are going to be able to be acted on. A lot of the people who are interested in quantum biology are interested because they want to get products out there that actually help make people's lives better. And so we just assume that what's going to happen, and again, we've been having discussions about this, there are going to be commercial opportunities and people who want to execute on them. And so by setting up the incubator, we're essentially creating a springboard that will make any team that wants to do something in quantum biology have a much easier time. Now we can check out the roadmap to see our current envisioned plan. We may end up switching things around, obviously, but essentially what this does is this provides for people a different range of, or a different set of opportunities. For the people who, there are going to be some people who are just traditional investors. They don't want to invest in the entire industry. They want to invest in a particular company. Great. The companies that get incubated by the incubator, those are investment targets for them. Some people are going to realize that those companies are that they're going to want to get in a little bit earlier, and as something like diversify inside quantum biology, the Quantum Bio Incubator will allow them to do that. Then there are going to be people who are going to be interested even earlier. And so that's how we have not yet worked out all the tokenomics. This is our next step, but we're working on setting that up for people who want to get in even earlier. And then one of the cool things about our design is that we're planning to have both the Institute and the DAO own a share of the incubator, so that when any company exits, some portion of the proceeds are going to go back in and increase the total amount of money being managed by the Institute and the DAO. And so essentially the field becomes self-funding. This makes it so that it doesn't need to rely on government funding forever, doesn't need to rely on philanthropy forever. What it needs is to get to actual successes, and then those successes will then make it so that the basic science can proceed more, and that'll unlock future opportunities.
I want to jump in here because I think that's a really important point that Geoff got across, which is, and whenever you create a new field, you're initially reliant on the interests of the early adopters and the early funders, the early philanthropists, to kickstart that field, unless there's already an existing person who can self-fund it entirely themselves. And a lot of times, you see that these new areas of research are only focused on sort of discovering basic science. And while that is honorable, the downside of just working on basic science is there isn't this long-term cash flow that can deliver a sustainable arc of permanent funding to develop and further, basically allow that basic science to hit an escape velocity where this field can fully mature. And so by designing it exactly as Geoff just described, there is an opportunity for the early seeds of support that go into setting up this new field of research to actually allow it to perpetuate into continuity, guaranteeing the like sustained life cycle of this new field rather than it just being a flash in the pan, as we may have seen with other basic areas of science in the past.
Yeah, this is part of the, very well put, James, and this is part of the sort of bigger master plan here, which is that like we want there to, it's essentially the idea of helping science to become more independent and more self-funding. This makes it so that where one is less reliant on previous institutions, and things can continue ahead essentially regardless of what happens.
Well, Geoff, I'll be a little bit more direct than that. There's a lot of politicking that happens in science, whether or not folks are aware. It happens in the background. And that is a terrible way to invest in and decide where resources go into the most important engine of creation for all of society, which is science. And so saying instead, we're going to turn to the people, we're going to turn to a meritocracy where ideas on their merit should be what gets elevated to the top rather than who you know or what political capital you have with people. Because we believe that science is net beneficial and should not have to rely on the whims and the wills of political individuals or of existing bureaucracies, and saying, no, instead, if people want to make this happen, we can will it into existence. And to me, that's vital.
And absolutely, to be clear, we do expect that. So like we've seen interest from different people in government. One place, for example, is ARPA-H. There's some expression of interest. They're looking into it more. There's a great group at MIT Lincoln Lab that we've had a bunch of discussions with. They're also very bullish on quantum biology. And then, we basically think what's going to happen is that, like, NSF, NIH, like academic departments, they're going to catch on. Like, on a long enough time frame, if the thing is actually real, they're going to figure it out. But we're not we would love them to be first adopters. We are not depending on them being first adopters. If they're second, third, fourth, etc., look, it's better for them the earlier they figure out what's actually going on, if quantum bio is actually real, then it's better for them if they come on early. We just don't need that to happen.
This reminds me of the same cycle we've seen in crypto, which is when Bitcoin was first invented, it wasn't reliant on the Fed, on banks for it to bootstrap. And it became an inevitability that with the passing of the ETF, it is now part of the traditional financial knowledge base or stack. And so we're taking the same approach here. We're not waiting for permission from government institutions to do what we know needs to be done. But if what we believe will pan out, we think it's an inevitability for the legacy institutions to open up, sober up, and say, well, we can't ignore this. And so that's one of the reasons why it's so exciting to be here as early as we are.
So we have a question from the community here that I just want to show on the stream about quantum energy being good for cell renewal, but can also be detrimental to cells, inducing cancer, and Clarice, I think you had an answer to this, but if you just want to address it real quickly as well. Sorry, just one last question about this is if you could also connect it to, because you guys have been talking about commercial applications of this as well too. So if you can connect it to any commercial applications as well too, just so we can hear about that, would be awesome.
So the idea is that weak magnetic fields have been linked to the up and down regulation of things such as cellular proliferation. So what we want is to find the correct magnetic field that will down-regulate the proliferation rate of, say, cancer cells and up-regulate the proliferation rates of, for example, lab-grown meat or bacteria that are used to produce insulin, right? So people have been finding magnetic fields that do stuff by chance, right? So there are companies that use haphazardly found magnetic fields to reduce the size of breast cancer tumors or of brain cancer tumors, right? So what we want instead is to take this quantum lens and be able to actually predict which magnetic fields do what, so that we can apply the correct magnetic fields for the correct application.
If I could just jump in there, I think one of the nuances here is when you fully characterized a science to create a model of how that science operates, that model has what we call predictive power. And predictive power is essentially the holy grail for us to use this new invention as an engineering tool, because we can say, without needing to run an experiment, but just knowing the way these mechanisms operate, what effects we can have on biology by design. And as Clarice had pointed out, there have been some early signs of people using these fields to actuate on biology, but this is using just a simple guess and check method. And that is an extremely inefficient and ineffective long-term way to do things. Whereas instead, if you had the precise understanding mechanistically how all of these things work, you can then discover counterintuitive ways or counterintuitive formulas or recipes that actually will deliver the result you want. Because, one consequence of a guess and check is you might actually actuate a biological system in the opposite direction that you want without even knowing it. So, while it is a step in the right direction. We still have a long ways to go, and the ultimate holy grail is that predictive power, and that's what we seek in our end game here.
And Geoff, I know I always ask you to do this, but I need you to break down that one application that you mentioned, using smartphones and all that.
Oh, I mean, I think Clarice does a good job at this, but I'm happy to describe it. I mean, basically, and I was thinking about this. I mean, it's hard to know exactly the form that things are going to take, but if you have your cell phone, the cell phone can emit a weak magnetic field. Okay, weak magnetic fields have effects, and then if we can figure out the pattern, then you can conceivably use your cell phone, and this was the sort of original scenario that Clarice described. You open up an app, and it's like your healing app, and you click the heal button, and it makes it so that your phone starts emitting a magnetic field of the right frequency and strength, and it makes your cells heal more quickly. So like that's like basic application. But then you can imagine a bunch of things. So first of all, you can imagine having wearables that have tiny devices in them that can emit weak magnetic fields. Because we're not dealing with strong magnetic fields, you're not like putting like an MRI on into your jacket. It's like you're gonna have something sort of gracefully enmeshed with whatever you're wearing. So you've got your futuristic wearable, and then on your phone you can input information about. Maybe it's like you select what particular problem that you're having. You've received a diagnosis, that something, you click the button, and now your clothing is giving a weak magnetic field to different parts of your body in a way that's going to be helpful. Maybe you have maybe you have a tumor and you want to do reduction of tumor size, and so that means you need weak magnetic fields of this type and this strength with this pattern in this location. And then once you have that, right? So we've got the phone, and you've got the wearables. Then the obvious thing there is this enables over-the-air updating. So you have researchers in the lab figuring out, and they realize, wow, look, it's actually possible to cause tumors to reduce more quickly if instead of hitting them with magnetic field pattern A, we hit them with magnetic field pattern B. This gets thoroughly tested. And you look down at your app, and there's a little update thing, and it's do you want to switch to the new magnetic field thing? You press yes, and you now have over-the-air updates for better personalized therapy. And because magnetic fields are we're not cutting into the body. You're not taking drugs. This is just it is going to penetrate through to the right part just by itself. Then that sounds to me like an extremely cool future of medicine.
I want to jump in here and add that, to me, one of the like medium term applications that really excites me is thinking about how we already use physical actuation on the body as part of sports medicine, through like stretching, through compression pants, so on and so forth, and just adding this in as a next layer for folks who are trying to.
Oh, it's such a good idea.
And I'm having this idea live. This is why we have a DAO, right? So we can jam and throw the ideas together. But that's already such a huge market. And I mean, I'm someone who has a yoga mat. I'm someone who has an exercise ball. A gun to work through my muscles. This just seems like the next piece for someone of a therapeutic or a healing device that almost anyone could get some benefit from. During my YC startup, we ended up working on a bunch of functions or experiments that people could use to A/B test what would work on their own sleep, because folks have different sleep issues for a variety of reasons. And one of the things that we saw was really beneficial for people was like temperature control. Ultimately, I can imagine a world where there are companies that make embeddings for a bed that will help you control the temperature of your bed. I can imagine a world where it's the exact same thing, where it's like a sheet of some sort of weakly magnetic fluxing material that that is in your bed that can actually play these frequencies at night to help you get better sleep. Just like simply.
This is
Yeah.
yeah, no, and in fact, people are doing this now. There's like you'll just talk to people who've decided that they're going to like sleep on some special fabric or set up something, and then the thing that's happening there is we don't really know that well how magnetic fields are affecting the body. It's like funny. We have people like joke about tinfoil hats, right? But it's notable that you're conceivably blocking like actually good electromagnetic radiation with your tinfoil hat. And so like if you want to like really think this through, I mean the same thing as people have concerns about 5G, and I'm sort of trying to respond to something that one of the people in the chat has raised, where we don't currently have great evidence. We know standard guidance from government bodies are that the relevant electromagnetic fields are too weak to have any sort of biological impact. But the problem there, the flaw in this is that if the weak magnetic field effects that we did see in the tadpole experiment are actually there, then well, okay, then the things are happening and what's the mechanism? And it's not surprising that government bodies are not yet considering quantum mechanisms, but as we break this open, people are going to start to think about it, and then we're going to have to ask questions about what magnetic fields in our environment actually are beneficial and harmful to whom, and maybe it differs per person, and etc. And then, that's sort of the controlling the negative side. If we manage to get better control over this, then we can see whether accidentally there are magnetic fields in the environment which are problematic. But yeah, maybe you don't want to block the magnetic field on your bed. Maybe you want magnetic field type R, and that type is going to be the right one until you get the over-air update that gets one that's slightly better for you, given a bunch of facts about you, and then you can upgrade your sleeping environment.
Or if they do show that 5G is really bad, and obviously you want to use your phone. Phones run on 5G, but you don't want to have whatever negative effects people end up having evidence. You emit a new signal, which
that's cool.
creates destructive interference and prevents the actual biological harm.
That's a great idea for a temporary measure. So it's like if we find out that 5G is causing harm, then you were like, well, let's not have 5G. Let's go on to 6G. Let's change the frequencies and so forth. But in the meantime, it might be possible to set up destructive interference using the cell phones themselves. That would be great. That's a great idea.
And one more time, just to hammer this home, the idea of the DAO here is to get these kind of crazy ideas, that maybe a traditional NSF or an NIH might be like, okay, you guys are completely off the spectrum here, but that actually citizen scientists care enough about, think that there might be a hypothesis around it, can formulate one, and the DAO can rally resources behind to test. Like there's no idea that's too ridiculous, and I think scientists by nature are questioning people, and it feels like in the present day, if you question too many things, you are rather than embraced, you're sort of like rejected, unless of course the things you're questioning follow the status quo. And so rather than that frame of like, oh well, you have to have a PhD from so and so institution in order to be considered a qualified skepticist, instead we embody the idea that citizens are scientists, and that scientists just ask questions. They want to get to ground truth, and the DAO is a vehicle where they can meet like-minded people, share these ideas, find consensus, and ultimately point resources to answering those questions that you're not the only one that has, but that individually you against the system would be laughed out of the room, which we think is ridiculous.
In fact, we've building on that, James, like we've found that in a lot of cases the quality of scientific engagement from the public can just be higher than the quality of engagement from different official scientific sources. I mean, you might think about it as though the sort of like more establishment science groups have decided, sort of like the pharmaceutical companies, to outsource risk. And so they're less interested in actually going through and testing the weird hypotheses. But the interesting thing is that when you care about the hypotheses, when you're like willing to think about quantum and biology and human cognition and how this relates to like 18 different things, that's actually harder. Like you actually, like there's a higher standard there. And so one of the reasons I'm very excited about decentralized science is that it's going to help us to actually raise the quality of the discussion.
I completely agree with that.
So I know we're coming up on the hour, but I have to ask, so James, what comes next? I mean, you have these MIT, Stanford trained scientists, Clarice literally being the leading quantum biologist in the world. What comes next with the incubator, with the community, and also Clarice and Geoff, you can feel free to chime in as well.
Yeah, so we're actively cultivating the community of folks like everyone on this call to join our Discord and just contribute to the conversation here. We are discussing the consequences of Clarice's landmark tadpole paper, which was touched on a little bit here. But then we're also in line with the roadmap that Geoff shared. We're looking for input from members or from folks who are just curious about quantum biology in general. What things do you have a hypothesis about? What things do you think are underlooked, should be tested? What experiences have you had in your life that would, to you, suggest that there needs to be, that there might be something here? And then, of course, for the scientists who are used to doing peer review, like we'd love your feedback on some of the early research that's come out of Clarice's lab, and also sharing some other research that might, you think, help to narrow the scope upon which quantum is relevant. So we've often heard this magnetite point that Geoff brought up, which is, well, perhaps it is some materials that are found here, and like that's great. The skepticism, the pushback helps us refine and come to the ultimate truth. So for anyone that is interested, the next steps from your end is to come join the discussion. You can go to Quantum Biology .community, as Clarice dropped in the chat, and join in the conversation, because you are at the precipice of helping to spark this movement, and actually help us get to the ground truth, because we need other minds to give us their input as well. It takes a village to start a movement.
We're planning, and so that's totally right, James, and the discussion, we found that in this discussion we're like having new ideas and adding, like it's just, I completely love that. It's awesome. We're also going to be doing experiments, like the DAO is going to be doing experiments. Like this question about magnetite, for instance. So the situation is that there are magnetotactic bacteria that essentially, there's bacteria that have these chunks of magnetite, and it works like a traditional compass. We did our tadpole study on Xenopus, it's a model organism, and there are no reports of magnetite of the relevant size. It's one of the most well-studied organisms in the world. But and so we think that somebody would have reported had they found it. People tend to not publish negative results of those. So if people have looked, like maybe people have looked in on many occasions and not found, it's like you can look to some level of depth with a microscope easily. But what if there are smaller chunks that are below and there are enough of them and something? There's like a whole bunch of reasons we think, theoretically, that's not what's happening. But it's just like, why would they have them? They're not, this is a non-migratory species, etc. But in science, nothing beats direct observation. And so there's just, and we have this on the DAO roadmap, the first experiment that we would love to have someone do, and then as we manage to raise money, this is something that can conceivably be funded, is actually directly checking and looking for inside Xenopus, inside the frog embryos, and we've got ways to do this, ways to check, but we need somebody to actually check. And so it's possible to be part of the conversation and to be part of the science.
And just to be clear, when we talk about these ideas get funded, the process for that is at some stage the DAO will hold a token sale that will generate a treasury, and then token holders will be able to vote on which projects and which science gets funded. Accurate?
Yeah.
Well, and also joining as part of the discovery, the conversation, the support, the process that helps to evolve these ideas from simply ideas to testable theories is another way that scientists and enthusiasts can earn ownership of this network. Like, I want to make it clear that the only way to contribute is not through capital, but it is through your intellect, your curiosity, your drive to see this move forward. We want that as well.
And meaning that those people who contribute their ideas or their time receive then tokens in return, which gives them some sort of co-ownership of the.
That's exactly right.
Cool. Well, it's been amazing to have you guys on. Again, quantumbiology.community to join the conversation. Quantum Biology, I believe, .xyz to check out the site. There's some amazing briefs. Clarice also just published a 250-page study showing the quantum effects in cellular machinery in tadpoles and tadpole development. So please do check that out. Quantum Biology DAO is the first DAO, like I said, accepted into BIO's incubator. We will be unveiling more DAOs coming up in the coming weeks, and applications for the cohort 2 of the Bio Incubator, of which Quantum Biology DAO is a part of, are still open. So you have a few weeks to get applications in. The deadline is November 5th. And so get your applications in there. If you have an idea to build a DAO, if you're a scientist that is looking for alternative pathways to funding, and if you want to build alongside these incredible builders like Clarice and Geoff, we hope you'll apply. So thank you all so much for joining. It was amazing to have you on. Thank you, Clarice and Geoff. We're so excited to build with you guys.
Thanks.
And we'll speak.
It's been so much fun. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
All right.
See you.
Thanks, everyone.